Welcome to Off the Record, a legal podcast.
Hello and welcome to Off the Record, a legal podcast with attorney Rhett Burney. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are going to talk about dividing retirement in divorce. We're going to talk about what you need to know. Rhett, it's so good to have you back.
Hey, Kevin.
So, dividing retirement and divorce, interesting topic. Let's just start with the obvious question. How are retirement assets generally treated in a South Carolina divorce?
Yeah. Well, if they were accumulated during the marriage, they would be a marital asset, which follows what the statutes, what the law says, that if you have a retirement and you earn that during the marriage, that is subject to an equitable distribution by the family court.
So is it as simple as just whatever retirement you earned during the marriage, your spouse has a right to part of that?
Well, it can be. So if, let's say you're married, Kevin, and during your marriage, you worked at the same place, you got married, then started working at a company and started participating in their retirement account, and then you went through a divorce, that entire account would be a marital asset subject to the division by the court. But where it gets tricky, and this happens all the time, is if one of the spouses started that retirement account prior to getting married. And so anything accumulated prior to marriage, generally, there's always exceptions, but generally would be a non-marital asset. So the problem we have as lawyers, and the problems that the court has, is trying to figure out how much of that total pie is attributable to the non-marital portion and how much is attributable to the marital portion, because it's not just simple math. Sometimes we use simple math to divide those, but as you can imagine, with a retirement account, generally it is tied into the stock market, okay? And so, stocks are going up and down throughout the entire, account during the account ownership. So that $1,000 that you had in the retirement account before you got married, it's grown to a different amount than the $1,000 you put in the year before you got married.
Oh, yeah.
So you may have a retirement account where somebody participated in it 10 years prior to marriage. And so that money they had in there 10 years prior to marriage has grown a lot more than the amount of money they had, that they got 5 years before they filed for divorce. So what we have to do in those circumstances is we have to hire experts to come in and calculate how much is the marital portion of that retirement account and how much is the non-marital portion of that account. As you can imagine, in some cases, there's a big discrepancy in that. And if people just look at the total amount of the retirement account and don't look at what portion was owned prior to the marriage, they could be giving up a lot of money in that situation, or giving a lot of money in that situation that normally they wouldn't have to give because it's a non-marital asset.
So let me ask a question. Maybe it's a stupid question. I don't know, but obviously you can't dip into your retirement without penalty before a certain age and all that stuff. How does that work? Do they actually pull money out of the account and then give it to the other spouse? How does that process work?
That is a really stupid question, Kevin.
Thank you.
No. Great question. Yes, so we go through, and once we determine what portion of the retirement account is marital, then it is divided. And the mechanism that we use is called a QDRO, QDRO, which stands for Qualified Domestic Relations Order. And what that does is it allows the plan administrator, what's called the retirement account company, to divide the account between the two parties without there being any tax consequences to the parties. However, if you pull that money out prior to retirement, you're going to be taxed on that money. And then also, if you have a retirement account, Kevin, and if you pull out money prior to your retirement, you're going to pay a penalty as well. That penalty is waived for a period of time once you go through a divorce. But yeah, you just don't get to pull the money out and not feel the consequences of it. You're gonna be hit with hefty taxes and maybe penalties as well, depending upon when you take that money out.
So what's the better way to how do you do that without being taxed on it? Like, is there a way to avoid that?
You leave it in there. You leave it in there. And then you hope that at the end of the day, once you retire, that you're in a lower tax bracket. So when you start taking the money out, then you're not taxed as much. Now you can take out, the tax tables change every year. And you can take out a lower amount from the retirement account and you're taxed at a smaller amount, but you have to look at your total income as well, because if you're in a high tax bracket and you take out that money, it's going to be taxed in your higher tax bracket. If you were unemployed, not making any money, and you took out, we'll just say less than $40,000. Again, these tables change all the time. That tax may be much smaller. So yeah, it's hard to get away from the tax man. It's very, very difficult.
But so if during a divorce, if the other spouse is owed a portion of that retirement, is the better move to wait till you retire and then pay out the spouse?
No, you can go ahead and divide that by using that QDRO. So what happens is the retirement company just sets up a separate account for the spouse receiving the money from the other spouse's retirement. And so it's just transferred. It goes from the husband, let's say, to the wife. And as long as she doesn't take that money out of that account, she will not be taxed on it.
Okay. So there are ways to do it so that you can satisfy the court order, but not have to be taxed on it.
That's right. Yeah, they treat retirement accounts differently than they do cash accounts. Now, you don't have to do a qualified domestic relations order for an IRA. You do have to do them for 401ks and pensions, but sometimes people have an individual retirement account. We don't have to do QDROs for that. They can just simply divide the money, usually fill out a form, hand it into the company, and they'll separate the accounts. But if you take that money out, same situation, you'll be taxed on that money.
Okay. Do the courts approach, military or government pensions differently than a private retirement account?
Well, yes and no. It's easier to value a 401k than it is a pension, just depending upon, are you in pay status or not pay status? There's sometimes, when we're looking at a pension and the parties are still working, that we look at it and you may get a statement that says it's worth $30,000. Well, that's not the whole story, because there may be, a present day cash value that, that we have to look at, because when the person hits full retirement age, it's a different type of account at that point in time. And so it may be worth a lot more than it shows on paper. So we have to be very, very, very careful with those types of things.
Yeah, no doubt. It's an interesting thing, because if one spouse was the sole earner and the other didn't contribute to a retirement at all, they're just going to get a portion of that during the time that they were married, and then presumably would have to set up their own account and move stuff over to it, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. That's exactly how it works.
Okay. Well, I guess it's not as complicated as I thought.
Well, until you start dealing with it, the hardest part when we deal with dividing retirement accounts are, one, preparing the QDRO. That's very specialized. And two, figuring out the marital value or the marital portion value, so you can make sure that it's properly divided. And typically lawyers can't calculate what that marital portion is, what the non-marital portion is. You have to hire somebody who's familiar with that.
Yeah, who really understands all the different formulas and whatnot to getting the right number, I suppose.
That's right. What did the market do historically over that period of time that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's some serious number crunching that I would not be capable of.
Me either. We hire those people.
Yeah, good for you. I would too. Are there other types of accounts that kind of fall into the same category as, or similarly to the way that retirement accounts are handled?
Mostly for the retirement accounts, IRAs, the 401ks, the pensions, those are generally all looked at the same as far as having to determine a non-marital portion versus a marital portion, just because those numbers just change because they're tied to the stock market usually. Of course, you can have cash accounts that are retirement accounts too. Those are very, very easy. But it's when you get into anything where you're having to calculate what that growth is, or really sometimes you can have a loss, what that looks like historically over that amount of time. Those are the hard things. CDs, you don't have to worry about that. Checking accounts, savings accounts, those are very, very easy. It's really when you get into those accounts where, there are tax consequences involved. You can have a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA. And those get to be very difficult as well, because those dollars, even though you may have a Roth IRA, let's say $50,000, and a traditional IRA with $50,000, even though on paper they look the same, they're really not. You wouldn't want one person take the Roth and one take the traditional, because they're taxed differently, because one's pre-tax dollars and one is post-tax dollars. So you have to be careful of those as well.
And with pensions, is that, I gotta believe, is kind of even more confusing, because
Yeah.
like I've heard stories, I'm originally from Chicago. So I mean, I used to hear stories of people getting their pensions taken away all the time because of,
Sure.
mismanagement of funds and government funds, whatever the reason was, people would get pensions that were totally obliterated.
Right.
So in that situation, both, it's the pension was divided, or part of the pension was divided. So both parties, then both spouses or former spouses, are at the mercy of whatever that pension value is, if anything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. If you get a pension in a divorce, that pension disappears for whatever reason. Um, it's gone. You don't get to go back to court and say, "Hey, I need a different asset." It's just the way it goes. That's just the risk. Same way with any other type of like a retirement account, 401k account. You can value it as of the date of filing, but by the time you get your divorce, stock market could crash and could be worth zero. We've had those situations. Likewise, it could go up as well. So, there's a little bit of risk. Dealing with a pension is a little bit different than dealing with a 401k, which is a lot different than just dealing with a simple cash account. Even though on paper they may all look the same, they have their different risks and rewards as well.
Do you often get people that, uh, for lack of a better term, are a little bit upset when they realize that part of their retirement has to go to their soon-to-be ex-spouse?
They're always upset. They're
Mhm.
always upset. And it's very hard, because when you look at the value of a retirement account and any asset, we typically look at its value as of the date that case was brought. So that's kind of our snapshot in time. And as you can imagine, we don't get cases resolved that same day. It may take a
Mhm.
year or two. So if you have an account that's tied into the stock market, it may go up or down, and you can feel the wrath of that. Or sometimes it works to your benefit. Yeah, we've had, as the country's been through tough times here and there. Stock markets go up, stock markets crash, and it's not unusual. Every lawyer's had that experience, to where you go to court on a Tuesday, something drastic happens on a Wednesday, and the amount of money that client thought they were getting on a Tuesday is changed on the Wednesday. When the pandemic hit, we had that. You had to ride it out. It came back up. So it's very difficult to explain to clients, that's just the way it is. We don't have control over the market. I wish we did,
Mhm.
don't you, Kevin? It'd be a little bit different. But yeah, that
Yeah. If you and
yeah,
I had control over the market, we wouldn't be
we
sitting here
wouldn't
doing
be
this
here
podcast.
talking to each other.
No, we would not. 100% we would not. No offense, but if we were
Yeah,
talking to each other, it'd be on some sort of yacht or beach somewhere.
exactly. But yeah, we have no control over that. And it's I wish we did. The housing market, we don't have control over that. So that's very difficult when you're valuing assets, having to explain to clients that the values go up and down, and it could be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It just depends on how everything's going at that time. And really, everybody's
Mhm.
in the same boat, right? The housing market goes up, everybody's goes up. If it goes down, everybody's goes down. So it affects everybody, but it feels personal to someone going through a divorce and having to see their assets change in value. So that's understandable that they're frustrated.
Yeah, I think so, especially something about retirement. I don't know why, but like I think everything makes sense. Okay, well, the house and then the car, or whatever, you have to divide things up. But like something about retirement, it feels like it's yours. It feels like it's just yours, and I think that's probably one of the reasons people have a harder time with it.
Yeah, because they're the ones that they feel, they went into work every day, clocked in, clocked out, and they had to show up and had to deal with all the great things that come with work. And then all of a sudden they're told, well, now you have to divide that with the person who was not doing that work. But
Mhm.
the way the court looks at it, it's a business dissolution. So while you may have been going into work, your spouse may have been watching the children and therefore not being able to provide or to put money into their retirement. So the court looks at it as a trade-off. And it hurts if you've spent all that time dealing. We have clients who, let's just say, they go third shift or they're having to travel all the time. And there's a lot of sacrifice with that, only to be told later they have to divide those assets. That really
Mhm.
gets to them, understandably so. But that's the way the law is. I wish we don't have any say so over that.
When does the asset, the retirement account, get split up? Like, is it the value of it at the time that all the figures are done, or you know what I mean? Because like you said, I mean, things can change really fast.
Yeah. So we will use the numbers. So in South Carolina, we calculate the values as of the date of filing for the divorce or the separation.
Okay.
And so we use those numbers in our big spreadsheet, let's say, to figure out how we're going to divide everything. But usually what we do when we're dividing a retirement account is we'll make a provision that, that the spouse will get the retirement, let's say split at 50-50, that the spouse receiving the 50% will receive 50% plus or minus any gains or losses, any fluctuations in the market. So even though the account may have been worth $1 million on the date of filing, now we've split it 500 and 500. At the time they actually get it, it may be worth 600 or it may be worth 300. So they may not necessarily get exactly what half was at the date of filing, because we tend to write in plus or minus any passive gains or passive losses.
Hmm.
So both parties feel the pain or the joy in the division of the account, depending upon the rise and fall of the market.
Yeah, that's fair though. I mean, you don't want to be on the hook for for a certain amount when the thing just tanks or something like that right before
Yeah,
you finalize
that's right.
everything. Yeah.
Right. That's right. That's right. Sometimes we'll have those situations where you'll have a house worth 500,000 and a retirement account worth 500,000. And rather than divide both of those, one spouse may want the house and one spouse may want the retirement account. On paper, they're equally valued. At the end of the day, 2 years later, they may not be equally valued, just
Hmm.
depending on what happens with the economy.
Yeah. I think I'd take the house, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Trying to think of the value, how the value's been going these days. We'll have
It
depends
just
on where the
depends.
house is.
It just depends. We've been through those periods of times where the house is an asset, and we've
Yep,
had the periods of times where it's just an albatross. You can't get rid of it. So,
that's true.
just again, nothing we can control.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Off the Record, a legal podcast with attorney Rhett Burney. For more information or to connect with Rhett and his team, you can visit rhettburney.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We greatly appreciate it. Rhett, I always appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for your time.
Great, Kevin. Take care. I'll see you again.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.